For a conversation on raising resilience in a digital world, please welcome Becky Kennedy, clinical psychologist and founder and CEO of Good Inside, with Julie Beck, staff writer at The Atlantic.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. Dr. Becky, it's so exciting to be here with you.
Me too.
I'm so excited to have you. So we will get into talking about technology in just a minute, but first I wanted for those in the audience who may not be as familiar with your approach to just kind of get like an overview of your philosophy toward parenting. So, with your book and your app and podcast, like the watchword is good inside, right? So this idea that regardless of behavior, all kids are good inside, and we start with that place with parenting. Can you explain a little bit how that manifests and kind of the nitty-gritty day-to-day of parenting?
Yeah, so I think that's right. Everything that drives my approach with parents and kids is based on this idea that we are all born good inside. And that can sometimes make us think, okay, does that just mean we're going to permit everything a kid does? But to me, the most important thing when you're looking at any human's behavior is actually understanding this gap. That often we see bad behavior. That's something we see. It's something someone does. But that has a gap with who someone is. Identity versus behavior. And most of child rearing to this point has been based on a foundation where there's no gap. I see my kid hit a sibling, and I just say, go to your room. Why would you do that? My kid lies to my face, and I think, oh, my kid's such a sociopath. They have no empathy. What's wrong with them, right? And so we see behavior on the surface, and we assume we know everything about that person. This obviously applies to adult relationships too. If you want to ever be effective in any relationship, and certainly we want to be effective with our kids, we have to separate those two. Because as soon as there's a gap between identity and behavior, we can wonder, why would my good kid hit? Why would my good kid lie to my face? Well, why do I lie to someone? And when there's a gap between identity and behavior, we can start to see a kid's bad behavior not as a sign of who they are, but as a sign of the skills they need to build. And then that completely changes our role.
And so the ultimate goal of parenting, as you see it, is less about getting a certain behavior to start or stop, and more about just understanding and connecting. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there's no trade-off here. And in other areas, we actually understand this more easily. So if you think about a kid who can't make a layup in basketball, you want your kid to make a layup. But no good coach would say, if you can't make a layup by tomorrow, go to your room and come back when you can make a layup. I won't permit this bad basketball behavior. All of us would say, it doesn't make any sense. Of course I want my kid to make a layup. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to focus on the underlying skills, and I'm going to have to stay connected to my kid. No kid is going to learn from a coach who's just yelling at them. They have to believe my coach believes in me, and they like me, and they hold me to a high standard, all of it. So of course I want my kid to stop hitting. Yes, but we're not going to get there by just focusing on the behavior. The behavior is a sign my kid doesn't know how to manage anger, or my kid doesn't know how to deal with jealousy. So by focusing on the anger or the jealousy, I can say, well, what would my kid have to do the next time they're mad at their sibling to make a better choice? And so there's really no trade-off here. By focusing on staying connected, being curious, and building skills, that's actually how we improve behavior.
I think that's actually a good segue to talk about technology, because given that connection is front of mind, right? It seems like, the strongest argument in favor of, technology for kids, giving your kid a phone, is that their friends are in the phone. There's connection in the phone, that's where their friends are, those interactions. They don't want to be missing out. And at the same time, we know that there are things about screens that can lead to isolation and disconnection. So how do you kind of think about the decisions around giving kids screens in terms of those trade-offs when it comes to connection?
Yeah, without a doubt, screens, phones, they can offer kind of connection or things that are positive to kids. And I tend not to be too rigid, about my approach. I'm a pragmatist. I have 3 kids of my own. I know what it's like to try to, make good decisions here. But giving a kid a phone at a young age and expecting them to make good decisions would be like putting a 2-year-old in a candy store and saying, make good decisions. It would be putting me in a candy store and saying to make good decisions. These are very impossible things to do, because a 2-year-old in a candy store being told have 1 piece of candy a day and that's it, they don't have the skills to manage their urges. And so we are actually setting them up to make bad decisions And then I'm setting myself up as a parent to now punish my kid out of frustration. It's a horrible setup for everyone. Giving a kid access to a device at a young age, their prefrontal cortex is not developed. They can't make long-term decisions. They are going to be faced with things they should never see. That's just the nature of the internet. And they're going to be curious. We want our kids to be curious. But never before until now has, especially in adolescence, the natural urge to be curious been met with kind of unparalleled access to things that are a completely horrible match for curiosity. And so we cannot tell our kids, just make good decisions. We actually have to do something, maybe we'll talk about this, which I think is very rare these days in parenting, and one of the things I like to teach about most, called setting boundaries and letting our kids be upset with us.
Well, as I told you backstage, I'm not a parent right now, but I have often thought that if I ever had kids, I would want to like pull an M. Night Shyamalan's like The Village and pretend that the internet didn't exist until they were like 12. Do you think that's a good idea?
I would, more than good or bad idea, I would just like love to know how you're going to accomplish that.
Yeah.
I'm a pragmatist, so I don't know how you're going to do that.
If you haven't seen this movie, it's about like a, seemingly 19th century village that's like being haunted, and then the village elders are like sort of doing the haunting to keep people from finding out that they actually live in the modern day. Sorry to spoil it. It has been out for like 20 years, so I feel like it's fine.
But the thing that you're saying that I think you can really draw inspiration from is I can say in my family, and I think a lot of the families you talk to at Good Inside, thinking about the things you really loved in your childhood and kind of going analog, I think is such an antidote to this technological world we live in. So carving out time where no one's on your phone and you actually find out the board games your kids are willing to play with you. And actually the first couple times you're gonna have to hear whines. I don't wanna do this, can I have my iPad? And you just can't take the bait. Let your kid whine, don't even get so mad at them. We all whine too if we are presented with something that's new and unfamiliar. But board games or having a family dinner and making that the priority on one weeknight, those things matter so much for a kid's mental health. And so I do think we can draw some inspiration from that.
Maybe just a little.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that, because one sort of genre of suggestion that I've seen going around is kind of like this like retro tech kind of approach. Like we ran an article in The Atlantic actually about like a pod of parents who all made a pact to get their kids landlines. Or people will say like, let's just have like a single desktop in the family room and like you can use it with the parents watching. So what do you think of that sort of like retro approach to all of this?
I mean, I think there's so many different manifestations, so many different things we can do, but and I know the article and what you're referencing, but I think this was a group of parents who are trying to figure out, how do we live our values? Like, how do we actually set up our kids for success? And then every family is going to do that differently. But I think being able to say to yourself as a parent, I don't have to do what everyone else is doing. And this part is key, talking to other parents in your community early. My oldest is in 8th grade. There were a group of us who were talking about what age are we going to give our kids phones? By the way, do you let your kids use an iPad on the weekend? At what hour? Can we just start talking about this when our kids are really young, these themes, kindergarten, 1st grade, not with moral superiority, like there's one way to do it, but can we just have open communication? So when my kid says, I'm the only one who can't do screens at 8 a.m. on a Saturday, I actually know that's not true, because most parents actually want to make similar decisions, but the pain of thinking that your kid is the only one who is too much, and it is hard. And as soon as you can take that away through community, together you can make better decisions.
You can do a little bit of fact checking on some of those.
And just say, let's be the group that holds out. Let's say we're gonna do this together, and then my kid does have other friends who, let's say, isn't on Instagram or whatever the decision might be.
Yeah, the retro thing is kind of interesting to me, because on one hand I'm like, well, it seems like a good compromise, like it seems like halfway, right? But how much like do we need, is there a way that it does kind of feel like The Village, where we need to prepare kids to like live in a world with the TikTok and ChatGPT and the tech that actually defines the age that they live in?
Yeah, I hear this from parents all the time, because I do think a lot about how important it is to, first of all, pre-technology, and I'm going to start with this because I think it's the part that's left out of the conversation about tech and kids, and I actually think it's the most important part of the conversation. If you're trying to set guidelines with your kid around their phone when you give them a phone, and basically that's the first time you've ever held a boundary with your kid ever, the reason your kid is going to freak out has nothing to do with the phone. The reason your kid is freaking out is because they're kind of saying, you have never held a boundary in my life. You've never said no to a cupcake. You've never said no to the thing I want in a store. Every time I get upset, you kind of seem scared of me being upset, so you fix the situation. And now I'm 13 or 16. I'm not reacting to the phone. I'm reacting to the fact that I don't even recognize this parent. It has never been more important to set boundaries with kids and help kids learn that your job is not to make them happy. Because the cost of not doing that when your kid is then in the tech world is so high. It's not just the tech that's kind of leading to our children's staggering rates of mental health struggles. It's the fact that we as parents are no longer setting boundaries and keeping our kids safe, which doesn't mean, by the way, one extreme, which a lot of us grew up with, you're not getting a phone, whatever. No, that's just pushing your kid away. But saying to your kid, my job is to make decisions I believe are good for you long term, and I love you so much that I'm willing to do that even in moments that I know you're gonna be upset with me because I know our relationship can get through that. The earlier your kid is when you establish that pattern, the easier all of the stuff around tech will be.
Well, I know you've written that you feel like the word boundaries is like missing from the sort of conversation with kids in tech, and I'm curious, like, how are we missing that? How are we ignoring that? And like, what is it about tech that makes those boundaries like so anxiety inducing for parents?
So let's just define it first, because I think most of us, even in adulthood, have a definition of a boundary that is either unclear or just isn't right. So here's how I define a boundary, and I like the definition because it's very usable in a practical way. Boundaries are what you tell your kid you will do, and they require your kid to do nothing. So many times I hear from parents in tech, I told my kid not to be on their phone, and they're on their phone. I told my kid not to be on their iPad, and they're on their iPad. They're not respecting my boundaries. And I say this, or they say like, they don't listen, you know? And I say this with love. I say, your kid doesn't have a listening problem, you have a boundary problem. Because if you're leaving the iPad out, that's not a boundary. You might make a request, don't take the iPad when it's not iPad time. But if you wanna set a boundary, you'd actually put the iPad out of reach and out of sight until the moment your kid has iPad time, because not many of us can be in the room with a device and not take it. Our kids definitely can't do that, right? And so we set ourselves up for these awful cycles of frustration because we're actually not setting a boundary. So if you say to yourself, wait, am I telling my kid something I will do? And does this require my kid to do nothing? You have to have 2 check marks in order to qualify for a boundary, which actually gives parents their power back. This is not about blaming parents. Think about it. I'm gonna put the success of my boundary on my 4-year-old or my 14-year-old? Like, I don't think so. I'm not gonna give my power away. This is on me. I think the other thing that makes it really hard with tech is that tech is designed to make us feel like we've never done enough. That's what it's designed to do. Something I found really helpful to explain to my kid, no matter how much you're watching a show, or definitely when you're on an iPad or a phone, no matter how much time you have, it's kind of like a cup with a hole. No matter how much I pour in, when you're done, the cup is gonna feel empty. And it's so compelling to think, just pour in more. But the issue actually is that it's just a cup with an empty hole. And so you're not wrong for feeling like it's never enough. That's actually how everyone feels. And so the next time you say, oh, 5 minutes more, I'm gonna kind of remind you of that. The iPad's gonna shut down because we have this timer. You're gonna be upset, and I totally get that. And sweetie, it will be over, and we're gonna get used to it over time.
So if the boundary is like, you know, don't be on your iPad unless it's iPad time, right?
Okay.
We said that's not gonna work. So how would you rephrase that to be an effective boundary?
So I'd say
instead.
I think it's so empowering connecting to say to a kid, you know how we've been getting into all these arguments about your iPad, you've been on it, when I say no, I feel like I haven't been so fair to you. Like, the truth is, I'm not great about seeing my phone in a room and not getting it. It's so hard, and that's not your fault. So we're gonna actually do something different. From now on, every day, I'm going to give you your iPad when it's iPad time. I changed parental controls, or I got an app that when it's over, it shuts down, so that's just the time there is. And then any other time but that time, I'm going to put the iPad out of sight and out of reach. And see, when you say it like that, you can say the same intervention from a very different intention. This is absurd, you can't control yourself, I'm putting the iPad away. That is the same intervention on the surface, kids feel our intention, not our intervention. They just feel, my parent thinks I'm a bad kid, I guess I am a bad kid, and when we tell our kids they're a bad kid, we build their identity as a bad kid. Why should we be surprised that they do more behaviors along the lines of that identity? The first intervention, I always say, for boundaries aren't something you do to a kid, boundaries are something you do for your kid, because you love your kid and you're looking out for their long-term interest.
I want to dig in a little more to like what may happen in that moment, right? So in my experience, whether we're talking about a young kid who wants more iPad time or an older kid who wants a phone, like kids are little lawyers. Like they're going to negotiate. They're going to keep asking over and over, same thing. They're going to, find their arguments. As they get older, the arguments get more convincing. So when you're thinking about boundaries around tech for your kids, like, do you negotiate? Do you meet them at the arbitration table?
So it's a great question, and I think I'd probably shift the question a little bit because I don't really think we're talking about negotiation first. I think one of the things we have to figure out as parents in any area with our kids is, what are my non-negotiables, right? And that shouldn't be a million things. Like for me, I don't really care what my kids wear to school. I'm just not gonna fight that battle. I'm gonna save it for the thing I care about, right? Screens, technology is one area that I think I have to embody my appropriate authority. So I often think about this like a pilot, right? And to me, Good Inside is about sturdy parenting, which really is this balance of boundaries and validation and connection all at once. And it is along the lines of what we want from a pilot. So picture you're in New York, you're flying to LA, and you really have to get to LA. It's like the equivalent of this festival. You have a ticket for it. It's a wedding, it's a meeting. You like have to get there. And you're 2 hours in, you're somewhere over the middle of the country, and your pilot says, I have bad news. We have to make an emergency landing. And then you start, what? Like, there's no way this is a big deal. I have to get to this festival, right? I don't think the pilot's saying, do I negotiate? Do I negotiate? Like, I don't really want them to be upset. I feel like they're gonna give me a bad rating on Yelp. Like, I don't know. Maybe, actually, everyone seems upset. Forget it. We'll keep flying. Can you imagine how you'd feel on that flight? And it's so important because you can hold two things as true. I am whining and protesting, and I want my pilot to make the decision that maximizes my safety. Please don't take my whining and protest into the cockpit and use that to make your decision. That would terrify you. And when you think about it that way, the questions we ask when our kids protest totally change. It's not really, do I negotiate? It's, if I have a non-negotiable that I really believe internally is good for my kids' safety and growth, I can certainly validate my kids' feelings. I recommend you do, just like a pilot. It would actually be helpful to say, I know, you didn't expect this, you're gonna miss the festival. That's a bummer. But then you want the pilot to say, I'm getting off the loudspeaker because I'm gonna make this emergency landing and keep us safe. That's like saying to your kid, I get it, this is a change. It's gonna be hard to adjust to this. No wonder you're upset. And my number one job is to keep you safe. I take that job very seriously, and we're gonna figure this out. I'm not getting you a phone, I get it. It's really annoying, and there's things we can figure out to stay connected to your friends, and here are the other friends who also don't have it, and I get you're annoyed. Honestly, I'd be annoyed if I were in your place too. We're gonna figure this out together.
So you are being empathetic, but ultimately you're holding the boundary you came in with, and it's just kind of not up for discussion, sorry.
Unless, again, like too often as parents, we use our kids' protest as a reason to change our internal decisions. That is a very unsturdy thing to do in any area of leadership.
So you need to just, is the idea then that like, they're gonna negotiate, they're gonna be upset, they're gonna have their reasons, they're gonna, and what actually you need to do is figure out how to manage your own feelings about it.
Well, now we're on to something, because I think at Good Inside, people always say, are we even talking about our kids? I feel like I'm just talking about managing my emotions.
Is the inside my inside? Was it my inside all along?
Exactly. Yeah. But at the same time, there are moments, tech, non-tech, as a parent, where you realize, I've changed my opinion. You know as a parent whether you've changed your opinion because something shifted, you have new information, or because you're scared of your kids' protest. Changing your mind from the first place is actually, again, a great thing to do as a leader. From the second place, that's where things kind of go off the rails.
So if I have given my kid a phone and I regret it, what do I do? And does that make me look wishy-washy at the negotiation table?
Great. So I actually think the whole emergency landing thing is a perfect parallel here. Nobody would ever say, well, I'm a pilot, I did promise them I'd go to LA. You know what's interesting? In that situation, I already gave my kid a phone, or I promised them I'd land in LAX. We're focusing on the external manifestation of something instead of an internal process. A parent's job is to do the best they can with the information they have in that moment. As information changes, you might make a different decision on the surface, but your process is remarkably consistent. I'm always making the best decisions with the information I have. That's what a good pilot does. That's what a good parent does. And so I definitely don't think it changes your kind of, again, power at the table. And I don't think dynamics of power are great leadership models anyway. Like, we're on the same team as people. We're not trying to win something. But yeah, I think as a parent, you should always feel like you can make a different decision when it comes from a new realization, something that shifted. But when we do that often because we're upset that our kids are upset, that's when in some ways we're putting their emotions in the driver's seat.
Well, it reminds me of my really excellent M. Night Shyamalan plan. Obviously, to pull that off, like, I would have to radically change my own behaviors with my phone, because I'm very distracted by it. So in the slightly less extreme version, right, in the real world, do parents need to kind of model boundaries for themselves if they're kind of asking that of their kids?
Yeah, I love this question, right? Well, do I have to moderate my phone use if I'm asking my kid to do the same? I don't know if have to. Like, I don't love when people tell me I have to do anything as an adult, but I do like knowing what's effective. So I think we know as a leader, if you're asking anyone in your world to do something and you're modeling the opposite behavior, I don't think it's a matter of have to. I just think in any area of leadership, someone would say it's probably just not going to be terribly effective. It's just always more effective if you're willing to model that behavior at least some of the time yourself. I think the other thing about being on our phone that isn't just about modeling, that we have to kind of come back to this core understanding about kids, is kids are driven by the evolutionary force of attachment. That's the most important thing in their life, is figuring out how to attach to us. And they're always kind of noticing, how close am I to my parent? How much am I able to get my parents' full attention? How disconnected are we? And often I think about my own childhood and how many times I tried to get my parents' attention when a device was truly, literally between us. It was zero, because I'm old and my parents didn't have mobile phones.
It might have been on the phone.
But for my own kids, when I think about that, it's sobering, because I'm definitely not perfect at this. And I think, wow, there's probably a lot of times my kid's trying to get my attention, and there's actually this block in the attachment, the back of my phone. And so beyond modeling good digital behavior, the more disconnected I am and unavailable I am to my kid, the more bad behavior they're gonna have. Because if they can't get my attention through that attachment, they're gonna have to do it the way any of us try to get attention when we're not getting it. Escalated, difficult behavior. And that's not a win for anyone.
Before we are out of time, I wanted to make sure we touched on AI, which is a newer wrinkle that parents are dealing with, right? And I want to think about it through that same lens of connection. Because now, right, when you're giving kids your access to the internet, like, the possibility of interacting with AI is there. Like, you try to block it, but like ChatGPT is on the web, like, the possibility is there. And to, learning problems aside, cheating on homework aside, like, thinking about it through connection, I've seen surveys that show, like, one of the main reasons kids are going to AI is for companionship, and that can be really, really dangerous. Obviously, we've seen, like, AI encouraging kids to harm themselves, but even, like, in the less extreme, if they're going to AI for connection instead of turning to their peers or to their parents, how does that complicate the sort of equation of connection and technology when you're thinking about that as a parent?
I mean, I think you're answering yourself. It really complicates that, right? I mean, I think that I think it's never been more important to stay emotionally connected to our kids, because what they are flooded with online, the videos they're gonna see, the inappropriate material they're going to come across, the text message they sent a friend that unfortunately will be screenshotted and shared in a group text, the private moments that become public, the porn they're going to see at a disturbingly young age. It's going to happen not because you have bad kids, but because they are in a digital world where they are being flooded by things that they just shouldn't see. And that is the world we're living in. And all the time when kids do things or are exposed to things they know they shouldn't do or shouldn't be exposed to, they have one of two instincts. I need to go to my parent, or I need to hide this from my parent, period. And AI is just one of the things that's happening that, to me, if a kid doesn't feel like I need to go to my parent, the cost to that and their mental health is just higher than it's ever been. And so one of the things I say to my kids, which is very nuanced, but I'm a big fan something I think is in decreasing popularity in the world, unfortunately, that you can hold two seemingly oppositional truths at the same time. My job is to make guidelines that I think keep you safe. And my job is also to be there for you when inevitably in certain moments you break those guidelines.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I want kind of parents to go into this digital world with.
So final question before we go. Obviously, tech is going to keep evolving, right?
Yeah.
Today it's AI. In 30 years, it may be the brain chips are all the rage, right? And so if you can leave parents with like a foundational principle or something to hold on to that they can apply, whatever the evolving technology may be, what would you say is like a touchstone for how to think about this?
Yeah, I think a way of summing up what I just said is just 2 words. I think about this whenever I'm even frustrated with my kids. Connection first. There's no strategy we have as our kids get older except for connecting with them. Because our kids get too old, they don't care about timeouts. They literally can't be punished in the same way. They definitely don't care about stickers. Not my kids. And the only thing you have when your kids get older, as they get more and more exposure in this digital world, is your relationship. And connection doesn't mean permissiveness. Connection doesn't mean keeping your kid happy. Connection means listening, being present, knowing you can repair when you mess up, because repair is probably the biggest connection builder there is, and none of us are perfect. And so those are 2 words I try to think about, just connection first. I think it's never mattered more.
All right, well, that is our time. Thank you so much, Dr. Becky. This has been fascinating. It's been a pleasure.